I froze halfway across the patio when my father's voice cut through the music. "There she is," he called, loud enough for half the guests to hear. "Did your made-up husband finally decide to show up, or is he still stuck in one of those important imaginary business meetings?" A few people laughed. Not because the joke was funny. Because nobody knew what else to do. I tightened my grip on the gift bag I was carrying for my uncle and aunt. Every conversation around me seemed to slow just enough for people to watch my reaction. "He's coming," I said quietly. My mother gave me a smile that looked sweet until she opened her mouth. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to keep doing this. Everyone here is family." Another ripple of awkward laughter spread across the backyard. Dad raised his glass. "I think it's time everyone stopped asking. There has never been a husband." The words landed exactly the way he wanted them to. Several cousins exchanged looks. One aunt sighed with obvious pity. Someone whispered, maybe she just doesn't want people to know she's still single. I didn't defend myself. I hadn't defended myself in years. Every time I tried, my parents talked louder, laughed harder, and somehow convinced everyone that I was being dramatic. So I stayed silent. Then my phone vibrated inside my purse. I glanced down without letting anyone else see the screen. "Just pulled into the neighborhood. See you in a few minutes." I slipped my phone away before anyone noticed. My parents saw my silence and mistook it for defeat. Neither of them realized that the story they had spent an entire year inventing was only minutes away from falling apart. I simply looked toward the driveway and waited. My Uncle David walked over with the weary smile of someone trying desperately to keep peace at his own celebration. "I'm glad you came, Linda," he said quietly. "So am I." He glanced toward my parents, who were already entertaining another group of relatives with fresh jokes about my imaginary marriage. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I wanted tonight to be about your aunt." "I know, Uncle David, none of this is your fault." And it wasn't. The backyard looked beautiful. White lights hung from the trees. Fresh flowers decorated every table. Old family photographs filled display boards celebrating 50 years of marriage between my uncle and Aunt Susan. Relatives had traveled from different states just to celebrate them. It should have been one of the happiest evenings our family had shared in years. Instead, my parents had turned me into the evening's entertainment. That wasn't new. Growing up, every achievement somehow became smaller after my parents finished talking about it. When I graduated college, they reminded everyone that my brother's grades had been higher. When I bought my first condo, Dad told relatives it was just a lucky market. When I earned a promotion at work, Mom insisted my manager was probably just being nice. Little by little, they taught everyone that nothing I said deserved to be believed. So when I quietly married the man I loved nearly a year earlier, they found the perfect opportunity. My husband had asked if we could keep our marriage private for a while. His work required frequent international travel, and he preferred keeping our personal life out of public conversations until a major overseas project was complete. I respected that. We had a beautiful ceremony attended by close friends. We mailed wedding announcements afterward. My parents received theirs. They congratulated us. They even called me that evening. Then somehow, they decided telling everyone I had invented the entire marriage would be more entertaining than admitting I was happily married. At first, I assumed the truth would eventually correct itself. Instead, the lie grew. Every family gathering I skipped because my husband and I were traveling became more proof. Every missed holiday became another joke. Every month, more relatives believed them. I looked around the party and realized that several people weren't laughing anymore. Some looked uncomfortable. Some looked confused. A few seemed genuinely unsure who to believe. That hurt more than the jokes themselves. Not because they doubted me. Because my parents had spent years earning everyone's trust while quietly destroying mine. So, my mother called from across the patio, making sure every nearby table could hear her. Should we leave an empty chair for your invisible husband? Dad laughed before adding, maybe he'll arrive on an invisible horse. Maury laughter followed. I lowered my eyes for just a moment. Not because I was ashamed. Because I knew if I looked at them any longer, they'd see exactly how much this still hurt. My phone remained in my hand inside my purse. I already knew where he was. He was closer. Closer than anyone here could imagine. Then the sound of tires rolling over the gravel driveway reached the backyard. Conversation after conversation slowly faded. One by one, heads turned toward the front of the house. A long black SUV had just pulled through the open gate and come to a smooth stop in front of my uncle's home. No one said a word. My father glanced toward the driveway with mild curiosity. My mother barely looked up. Neither of them had any idea that everything they had spent the past year convincing this family to believe was about to disappear the moment that passenger door opened. I slipped away before anyone noticed the tears gathering in my eyes. The backyard was full of music and conversation, but once I stepped onto the quiet side walkway beside the house, everything became still. The only sounds were the distant laughter from the party and the soft rustling of leaves overhead. I leaned against the wooden fence and closed my eyes. At 32 years old, I shouldn't have felt like the frightened little girl who spent her childhood wondering what she'd done wrong. Yet somehow, every family gathering brought her back. Not because of what my relatives said. Because of what my parents always made them believe. Linda. I turned and saw my cousin Megan walking toward me with 2 glasses of lemonade. I thought you might want one. Thanks. She handed me a glass before standing beside me in silence. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. I'm sorry. I gave her a small smile. For what? For all of this. She glanced toward the backyard. I don't even know what's true anymore. That sentence hurt far more than my father's jokes. Not because Megan was accusing me. Because she was being honest. She genuinely didn't know who to believe. My parents have been saying the same thing for so long, she continued carefully. Sometimes I wondered if maybe, I don't know. If maybe I really made him up. She looked embarrassed. I didn't want to think that. I know. I just. She shook her head. They sound so certain. I looked down at the glass in my hands. That's how they've always been. What do you mean? I let out a slow breath. When we were kids, if something broke in the house, they could convince everyone I did it before I even walked into the room. Megan frowned. I never knew that. Most people didn't. I gave a quiet laugh without any humor behind it. They've always been really good at telling stories. She looked at me differently now. Not with pity. With curiosity. As long as I've known you, she said softly, you've never really defended yourself. I used to. What happened? I looked toward the backyard, where another burst of laughter floated through the air. I realized arguing never changed their minds. And everyone believed them anyway. So I stopped trying. The words came out calmer than I expected. Maybe because I'd repeated them to myself for years. Maybe because I'd finally accepted them. My phone buzzed again. I unlocked it. Running 5 minutes behind. Airport security held us longer than expected. I'm almost there. Love you. I smiled despite everything. Just 3 words. Love you. Those words carried more reassurance than every promise my parents had ever made me growing up. Megan noticed the smile. Was that my husband? She hesitated. So he really is coming. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my purse. Yes. She searched my face. For the first time that evening, someone wasn't looking for proof that I was lying. She was looking for the truth. I believe you, she said quietly. Those 3 words nearly broke me. Not because I needed validation, because I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone in my own family had offered it without hesitation. Before I could answer, another loud laugh echoed from the backyard. Dad. Even from this distance, I recognized it instantly. Megan peeked around the corner toward the patio. They're still talking about you. I didn't have to ask what was being said. I already knew. Mom and Dad never let an audience go to waste. They've got Uncle David's neighbors listening now, Megan said with disbelief. I rubbed my forehead. This is exactly why I stopped coming. They're making everyone think you're some kind of joke. I know. She looked genuinely upset now. I don't think Uncle David knows how to stop them without causing a bigger scene. He shouldn't have to. Tonight wasn't supposed to be about me. It was supposed to celebrate 2 people who had spent 50 years building a marriage based on love and respect. Instead, my parents had turned the evening into another performance at my expense. I straightened my shoulders. I'm not giving them another reason to ruin this party. You sure? I nodded. If I stay out here, they win. Together, we walked back toward the backyard. As soon as we stepped onto the patio, I could hear my father's voice carrying across the tables once again. Maybe we should all chip in and buy Linda an imaginary anniversary gift. More uncomfortable laughter followed. This time, though, I noticed something different. Not everyone was laughing. Several relatives simply looked away. A few exchanged uneasy glances. Even Uncle David looked exhausted. The mood had shifted. The jokes weren't getting funnier. They were becoming harder to defend. I quietly took my place near one of the tables without saying a word. Across the yard, my father caught sight of me and smiled with the confidence of a man who believed he still controlled the story. He had no idea that every minute he kept talking was bringing him closer to the moment he could never take back. What would happen when the next person through that front gate proved every one of his jokes wrong? Before anyone could change the subject, my father stood up and tapped his spoon against his glass. The clear ringing sound silenced the conversations around the patio. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with a broad smile, before we cut the cake, I'd like to say a few words. My stomach tightened. Uncle David looked surprised. I wasn't planning another speech, Robert, he said politely. It'll only take a minute. Without waiting for permission, my father stepped toward the center of the patio, where everyone could see him. He lifted his glass. First, congratulations to David and Susan. 50 years of marriage is something worth celebrating. Everyone applauded. For one brief moment, I thought maybe he was going to leave it there. I should have known better. He looked directly at me. And speaking of marriage, a few relatives immediately lowered their eyes. They knew where this was going. I'd also like to thank Linda's invisible husband for making the long trip from wherever imaginary people live. Scattered laughter broke out. Not nearly as loud as before. Still, it was enough. He couldn't make it tonight, Dad continued dramatically. I'm sure he's very busy closing imaginary business deals. My mother chuckled and shook her head. I told Linda she didn't have to keep pretending. We're family, we love her anyway. Someone near the dessert table muttered, Robert. But my father ignored him. In fact, he continued, if anyone happens to see this mysterious husband tonight, please let me know. I've been searching for him for almost a year. A few forced laughs echoed through the yard. I looked around. The atmosphere had changed. People weren't enjoying this anymore. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked uncomfortable for my uncle, whose anniversary dinner had become the backdrop for my humiliation. Uncle David finally stepped forward. Robert, that's enough. Oh, come on, my father replied with a grin. We're just having a little fun. It isn't funny. The firmness in my uncle's voice surprised everyone. For a second, my father looked caught off guard. Then he laughed. David, don't be so serious. My Aunt Susan quietly reached for her husband's hand. I could see the disappointment on her face. Months of planning this celebration, and now everyone was focused on the argument instead of their anniversary. I hated that. I hated that my parents always found a way to make every important occasion about themselves. I started to stand. Uncle David. He gently shook his head. It's all right, Linda. No, it wasn't. Before anyone could say another word, the sound of tires rolling across the gravel driveway reached us again. Every head turned toward the front gate. The long black SUV I'd noticed earlier had come to a complete stop. The driver's door opened first. A man in a dark suit stepped out. He walked around the vehicle with calm, professional movements before opening the rear passenger door. The conversations stopped completely. No music. No laughter. Only silence. The driver reached inside and carefully lifted out several beautifully wrapped gift boxes along with a large bouquet of white lilies. Whispers spread across the patio. Who is that? Are they at the wrong house? I don't recognize the car. My father glanced over briefly before dismissing it with a shrug. Probably another guest. He turned back toward the crowd as if nothing important had happened. Now where was I? No one answered. Because nobody was listening anymore. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the driveway. Then a tall man stepped out of the SUV. He adjusted the sleeve of his navy jacket, thanked the driver, and accepted the flowers. There was nothing flashy about him. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to impress anyone. He simply looked like a man arriving exactly where he intended to be. He paused beside the vehicle and slowly scanned the backyard. His eyes moved across table after table. Across relatives he'd never met. Across children playing near the garden. Across my parents. Then they found me. The moment our eyes met, his entire expression softened. The tired look from traveling disappeared. A warm smile spread across his face, the same smile that had greeted me every morning since the day we were married. Without hesitation, he started walking straight toward me. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the quiet rhythm of his footsteps crossing the stone pathway as every member of my family watched him approach. Every conversation on the patio died away before he reached me. I didn't move. For the first time all evening, I didn't feel like I had to prepare for another accusation or another joke. I simply watched my husband walk toward me with the same calm confidence he always carried. When he stopped in front of me, he smiled. I'm so sorry I'm late. His voice was warm, completely unaware of the storm he had just walked into. The flight landed almost an hour behind schedule, and security held us longer than expected. It's okay, I said, smiling despite everything. You made it. He leaned down and kissed me gently. Not for the crowd. Not to prove anything. Just the way he always greeted me after we had been apart. When he pulled back, he squeezed my hand. I missed you. I missed you too. The silence around us became almost deafening. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw several relatives staring with their mouths slightly open. Someone dropped a fork onto a plate. My husband finally noticed the audience. He smiled politely. I guess I should introduce myself. He turned toward my uncle and aunt. You must be David and Susan. My uncle nodded slowly. I am. My husband walked over and offered his hand. Congratulations on 50 wonderful years together. Linda has talked about this celebration for weeks. He handed Aunt Susan the bouquet. These are for you. Her eyes filled with surprise. They're beautiful. And these, he said, nodding toward the wrapped gifts the driver had just brought over, are from both of us. Linda spent a long time picking them out. Aunt Susan looked at me. You helped choose these. About 3 weeks ago, I answered. She smiled warmly. I had no idea. I wanted it to be a surprise. The atmosphere softened for a brief moment. Then my father's voice broke through it. He forced out a laugh. Well, everyone looked at him. This is quite the performance. I slowly turned. What do you mean? He shrugged. I mean, if you're going to hire someone to play the part, at least you've chosen someone convincing. Several relatives immediately looked uncomfortable. Even my mother didn't laugh this time. My husband frowned slightly. I'm sorry. Dad pointed toward me. Linda has always had a vivid imagination. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Even now, even after watching my husband kiss me, speak to my relatives, and arrive with gifts we'd chosen together. He was still trying to keep the lie alive. Before I could answer, my cousin Megan stepped forward. Uncle Robert. There was disappointment in her voice. I don't think that's what's happening. Dad ignored her. He looked directly at my husband. So how much is she paying you? The words hung in the air. Instead of getting angry, my husband looked genuinely confused. He glanced at me, then back at my father. I'm her husband. You expect us to believe that? We've been married for almost a year. A murmur spread across the guests. One of my older aunts blinked several times. A year? My husband nodded. We had a small ceremony before I left for an overseas assignment. He smiled at me. It wasn't the wedding either of us originally planned, but it was perfect. Another cousin spoke up. Do you have pictures? Of course. Without hesitation, my husband pulled out his phone. He opened an album and handed it to the nearest relative. There were pictures of our ceremony, pictures of us exchanging vows, pictures of us signing our marriage license, pictures of us laughing with the handful of close friends who had attended. The phone quickly passed from one relative to another. Every face that looked at those photos changed. They look so happy. I've never seen these before. These are beautiful. Then Aunt Karen looked up from the phone. Wait. She frowned. You said you've been married almost a year. That's right. She slowly turned toward my parents. Didn't you two receive their wedding announcement? Neither of them answered. Another relative spoke up. I remember Linda mentioning she mailed announcements. I remember that too. I thought Robert said there wasn't actually a wedding. The whispers grew louder. My mother looked at my father. For the first time that evening, neither of them seemed to know what to say. Then my husband added something that made the silence even heavier. We also mailed thank you cards after everyone who responded sent their congratulations. His eyes settled on my parents. I appreciated your kind note. I saw the color drain from my mother's face. She remembered. Because it was true. She had written that note. Dad swallowed. Around us, relatives slowly began connecting every conversation they'd had over the past year. Every joke, every rumor, every confident statement that Linda had invented a husband. None of it had been a misunderstanding. Someone had chosen to make it all up. I looked directly at my parents. For the first time in years, I didn't lower my eyes. I didn't apologize. I didn't try to keep the peace. In a calm voice that carried across the silent patio, I asked, would either of you like to explain why you've spent the past year telling everyone my husband wasn't real? For several long seconds, neither of my parents said a word. The entire patio was silent. No music. No laughter. Even the children who had been running through the yard had stopped to look toward the adults. I had imagined this moment so many times over the past year. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead, I just felt tired. My father cleared his throat. This is all a misunderstanding. No, I replied calmly, it isn't. He forced a laugh that fooled no one. You kept everything so secret, people naturally had questions. I wasn't talking about everyone. I held his gaze. I'm talking about you. My husband quietly reached for my hand but didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't his battle to fight. It was mine. You received our wedding announcement, I continued. My mother's eyes dropped to the ground. You called me the night it arrived. She remained silent. You congratulated us. Still nothing. I looked around the patio. So did Dad. Several relatives slowly turned toward my parents. I opened my phone and found the message thread I had kept for nearly a year. I hadn't saved it to prove anything. I had simply never deleted it. I handed the phone to Aunt Karen. She adjusted her glasses and quietly read the screen. Congratulations, sweetheart, she read aloud. We're happy for both of you. We hope to meet him soon. She looked up at my mother. You sent this. My mother's lips parted but no words came out. I took another slow breath. There are more. I scrolled farther. Photos I had sent after the ceremony. My parents had responded to those too. Complimenting my dress. Commenting on the flowers. Telling me I looked happy. Every response carried a timestamp. Every response proved they had always known the truth. Aunt Karen passed my phone to another relative. Then another. Nobody rushed. Nobody argued. They simply read. One by one, expressions of confusion turned into disbelief. Then disappointment. Finally, Uncle David spoke. His voice was quiet. Robert. My father looked at him hopefully. You knew. It wasn't a question. You knew they were married. Dad looked around the patio, as though searching for someone willing to rescue him. No one did. He began. It wasn't supposed to become such a big thing. A heavy silence followed. My cousin Megan frowned. What does that even mean? My father rubbed the back of his neck. It started as a joke. A joke, Megan repeated. You let the whole family believe Linda invented her husband. I didn't think she'd stay away from family this long. I stared at him. So you expected me to keep showing up while you called me a liar? He didn't answer. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We thought if people questioned you enough, eventually you'd introduce him. I blinked. You already knew him. She looked ashamed. You knew his name. You knew where he worked. You knew we were married. She nodded faintly. I know. The words hit me harder than all of the jokes. Because they confirmed what I had secretly hoped wasn't true. They hadn't misunderstood. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen this. My husband squeezed my hand gently. I'm sorry, he whispered. I smiled at him. You have nothing to be sorry for. Uncle David slowly set his glass on the table. I spent months planning tonight. His voice carried across the quiet patio. I wanted this anniversary to be about celebrating family. He looked directly at my parents. Instead, you used it to humiliate your own daughter. Neither of them looked up. You owe Linda an apology. My father hesitated. Then he looked at me. If you're offended. I shook my head. No. He frowned. I'm not interested in another apology that starts with if. Several relatives nodded. Aunt Susan walked over and hugged me. I'm so sorry. You didn't do anything. I should have stopped it sooner. I hugged her back. You shouldn't have had to. One after another, relatives approached me. I'm sorry I believed it. I should have asked you instead of listening. I never imagined your parents would lie about something like this. None of those apologies erased the past. But every one of them mattered. Because they came with accountability. Something my parents still hadn't offered. My father looked around the patio. For the first time in my life, he wasn't controlling the room. No one was laughing at his jokes. No one was waiting for his version of events. His influence had disappeared in the space of a few minutes, not because someone attacked him, but because the truth had quietly replaced his story. Uncle David took a deep breath. I don't want any more arguments tonight. Neither did I. This is still Susan's anniversary. He looked at my parents. I think it's best if you leave. My mother's eyes widened. David. I mean it. She looked around, expecting someone to object. No one did. Dad slowly picked up his jacket. Neither of them argued. Neither of them apologized. They simply walked toward the driveway in complete silence. I watched them go. For years I had chased their approval. Tonight I realized I didn't need it anymore. The rest of the evening slowly found its way back to what it should have been. My husband sat beside me as relatives asked him about his travels, his work, and how we'd met. There was no grand performance. No boasting. Just honest conversations. People laughed again. This time it wasn't at my expense. A few weeks later, my husband and I invited Uncle David, Aunt Susan, Megan, and several other relatives to our home for dinner. It wasn't a replacement for the anniversary party. It was a new beginning. The conversations felt lighter. Nobody was trying to compete. Nobody was trying to control the narrative. As for my parents, they weren't invited. Not out of revenge. Out of peace. I finally understood that forgiveness and access weren't the same thing. They could choose to take responsibility someday. If they did, I would listen. But until then, I wasn't going to keep reopening the same wound. That night, after our guests had gone home, my husband helped me clear the last of the dishes. He smiled and asked, "Do you regret staying quiet all those months?" I thought about the question for a long moment. Then I smiled back. No. He raised an eyebrow. Why not? Because I didn't have to prove the truth. I slipped my hand into his. The truth showed up all by itself. As I closed the front door behind us, I realized something had changed forever. For the first time in my life, the people who truly mattered believed me, not because I argued louder than anyone else, but because the truth had finally walked through the gate.